أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين، لا سيما بقية الله المنتظر، أرواحنا له الفداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
وعليكم السلام.
عظم الله وجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بالحسين عليه السلام. In our discussion on how we can qualify for those great rewards which are mentioned in the traditions for mourning Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, we said that we must have an essential ingredient. And this essential ingredient, we said, was having the wilayah, the divine authority of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam.
Inshallah.
And we said that with regard to the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, one of the dimensions of this is to follow them in their way and to emulate their example, to implement their teachings in our life. This is all to do with being obedient to the Ahlul Bayt. This is one of the key dimensions of the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt. And so it is all about being Husseini. Because if we are like Hussein, we will definitely ensure that we have this wilayah and therefore qualify for those great rewards for the mourning of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein.
Inshallah.
So now, we asked ourselves this question: well, how can we therefore be Husseini? And the approach that we have been taking in order to answer this question is by looking at the verses known as the Ayatu Ibadi Rahman, the verses of the servants of the All-Compassionate. And up to now, we have looked at 6 characteristics which are mentioned in this list of characteristics in these verses. There are 14 altogether, and we have also been seeing how each of these characteristics applies to those who were present in Karbala, to see exactly how Aba Abdullah al-Hussein and his family members and his companions, they were able to embody these characteristics in the maximum way possible. And so they were the ultimate Ibadur Rahman. And on the other hand, there were some people who were the complete opposite. They were the Ibadur Shaitan, the servants of Shaitan. And we said that this also forms a very useful framework for us to use in order to evaluate ourselves. That where are we in this hierarchy of Ibadur Rahman? Because of course, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they are at the very top, but others, they can be at lower levels of servants of the All-Compassionate. And hence, the title of the series of these lectures is Embodiment of Verses of the Servants of the All-Compassionate in Karbala. So inshallah, tonight we will continue looking at these characteristics, in particular 3 other characteristics. But this time, when it comes to the application in Karbala, I would like to do it after I have examined all 3 characteristics, rather than examine a person or one of the personalities after each one. The reason for this will become apparent as we move along. So inshallah, with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, we'll start with the first one.
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So in verse 68, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions characteristics 7 and 8 together. Yesterday we looked at the first part of verse 68, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ. The Ibadur Rahman are those who do not invoke, they do not call upon another God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This we saw yesterday, and we saw how that was applied as well. But then the verse continues and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions two more characteristics of His servants. He says, وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا يَزْنُونَ. There are two characteristics here. First of all, the Ibadur Rahman are those who do not take the life of any soul who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made inviolable. Allah has protected that life. Allah has made it secure. Meaning they do not commit murder. They do not take the life of someone unlawfully. Illa bilhaq. Except with a due cause and due reason. And then the second characteristic in this verse is wala yaznun. They do not commit zina. They do not commit fornication. Now, perhaps this question has come to your mind that you are discussing the characteristics of Ibadur Rahman. Ibadur Rahman, these pure, virtuous, pious servants of the All-Compassionate. So why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention these grave sins such as murder and committing fornication? It is obvious, isn't it, that Ibadur Rahman would never even think about committing these sins. They are too high, they are too exalted. So why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala list such grave major sins in the context of the virtues and the characteristics of Ibadur Rahman? What is the philosophy of mentioning these grave sins in this list? Well, there is a very important principle that we must bear in mind. Whenever we are looking at exegesis, tafsir, or we want to understand verses of the Quran or a surah of the Quran, there is a very important principle that we must always bear in mind. And that principle is that we must always take into account the time and the place when any verse or surah was revealed. This is essential when we want to understand the Quran better. So now, when we look at this, it will make more sense why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned these two characteristics in this list of Ibadur Rahman and their characteristics. Well, Surah Al-Furqan, it was revealed in Makkah. It is a Makki surah. And therefore, it was revealed relatively early in the history of Islam. And we know that Islam came at a time of Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. And it always takes some years before any real change can effectively take place in society, before everyone is acting in a particular way. It takes years sometimes, especially in such a society like the Jahiliyyah that they existed in the Arab Peninsula. So, at that time, when this surah was revealed and these verses were revealed, it was a time when these type of sins, fornication and murder, were prevalent in society. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by placing these characteristics just after, in fact, the characteristic of Tawheed and being a Muwahhid, what Allah is saying is that He is giving a very clear message to the Arabs of the time that these sins that you are committing, the sin of murder and fornication, of zina, it must come to a stop. You must stop these type of sins. My ibad, my servants, they do not commit these type of sins. Rather, my ibad, they are like this. And so he lists all of the characteristics of Ibadur Rahman. Is sending out a very clear message to them that if you truly want to be my ibad, then you would not do these two things. you would do those other things that I have mentioned in this list. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And therefore we see that it is placed alongside the characteristic of Tawheed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, my servants are muwahhids. They do not do these type of things that you are engaging in. Now, in order to just give us a better idea of how this works and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put these two characteristics in this list of 14, it is important to have an idea of how bad society was at that time, how depraved the Arabs, most of them, were at the beginning when Islam had just come to the society over there. Let's have a look at this. Well, one of the most horrific practices that the Arabs, the Jahiliyyah Arabs, used to engage in was the practice of burying daughters alive. Ma'adallah. What a horrific crime they used to commit. Now I'd like to just quote for you a story, mention this anecdote, this true incident that really explains how depraved they were. There was a man who had just converted to Islam. He had just accepted this new religion of Islam. And so he comes to our beloved Prophet Rasulullah A'zam sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he says to him, I have committed a very big sin. So can my sin ever be forgiven? Will Allah accept my repentance? Rasulullah tells him that Allah is Tawwab and He is Rahim. He is the accepting of repentance and He is the all merciful. This man says him, but my sin is huge. The Prophet says to him, woe be unto you. However big your sin is, Allah's pardon is bigger. However big your sin is, however great we think, in fact this is a lesson for us all, however big we think that we have sinned, Allah's pardon and His maghfirah and His afu is greater. So then this man, he begins to tell Rasulullah the story about his sin. What did he do? It's a very sad story indeed. He says that at the time of Jahiliyyah, I went on a long and far journey. When I left, my wife was pregnant. And I was away for 4 years. When I returned after 4 years, my wife greeted me. And when I was greeting my wife, I saw behind her in the house, there was a small girl. So I asked my wife, who is this small girl in the house? And she said, it's a daughter of one of the neighbors. So then I thought that, well, this small girl will eventually go home. But that day, that evening, that girl just stayed in the house. She didn't go. So then I became suspicious that perhaps my wife is lying to me because she thinks that I might kill her. Because this was a standard practice of the time that they would bury their daughters alive. So then he comes up to his wife and he says, look, tell me the truth. Who is this small girl in the house? So she says to him, when you left for that journey, I was pregnant and this is your daughter. So now that night, he tries to go to sleep, but he can't sleep well at all. He's thinking about this. So then, near the time of sunrise, he goes to his daughter's room, he wakes her up, and he tells her, we are going to a palm grove. So the daughter comes with him. When they get to this palm grove, he starts digging a hole. He starts digging a hole and his daughter actually helps him dig. She doesn't know what he's doing. Then, all of a sudden, when the hole had become deep enough, he grabs his daughter and he throws her in. Now at this stage, it is narrated in the report that Rasulullah's eyes become filled with tears. He throws her in the grave, and then he says himself that with one hand I held her down, with the other hand I started putting the earth over her. She was screaming and yelling and kicking. She was saying, "Oh Father, what are you doing? What are you doing?" And in fact, he narrates this very touching sentence. He says, "As I was doing that, some of the earth went onto my beard, and my daughter, she actually stretched out her hand to wipe that earth from my beard. But with a cold heart, I continued filling the grave until there were no more screams. I buried her alive." Now, when he finished this, Rasulullah, as he was wiping away his tears, he said, "If it wasn't for the fact that Allah's mercy precedes His wrath," you know, we have in the traditions, sabaqat rahmatuhu ghadabah, Allah's mercy precedes His wrath. He said, if it wasn't for the fact that Allah's mercy precedes His wrath, He would punish you immediately. But this gives us an idea of how it was at that time. That these practices that these Arabs would engage in, this practice of burying their daughters alive, and therefore now we can understand very clearly why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lists these two characteristics of fornication and murder in the list of the characteristics of Ibadur Rahman. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So now, the ninth characteristic of the servants of the All-Compassionate. Like I said, once we've mentioned all three tonight, we will look at its application in Karbala. The ninth characteristic is that they do not bear witness to what is false. This is verse number 72, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَشْهَدُونَ الزُّورِ. They do not give testimony, they do not bear witness to what is false. Now, Allah in His masterpiece known as Al-Mizan, this great work of His, He puts forward two meanings for this verse. What does it mean that they do not bear witness to what is false? He says the first meaning is the literal meaning. Like, for example, when somebody has to go to court, there's a legal case and they are a witness. So the Ibadur Rahman, one meaning is that they do not give false testimony, meaning that they don't tell a lie about what they heard, about what they saw in that particular case. What actually happened, they don't lie about that in like a legal court case. But then the second meaning that he puts forward is much wider than this. He says the word zur includes that which is batil, that which is completely devoid of any base, that which has no validity, that which is vain and false. So he says, from this point of view, the meaning is much wider. It's not just limited to that incident in a court case, for example. Here, it means that the Ibadur Rahman, when we look at the word zur to mean batil in this way, it means the Ibadur Rahman, they do not attend false gatherings. They do not attend anything that a gathering, if a gathering has anything wrong about it, they do not attend that type of gathering. They do not engage in false talk and wrong talk. They do not engage in wrong activities. This is the wider meaning of this. So the Ibadur Rahman, they abstain from all of these things which are wrong and batil. Now, with regard to this, in fact, I'd like to just focus on not attending wrong gatherings, especially for the benefit of my younger brothers and sisters, inshallah. Not attending wrong gatherings is one of the characteristics of the Ibadur Rahman. Now this can mean mixed gatherings sometimes, but other times it might not be mixed. It all depends on what is happening in that gathering. It all depends on what is being said, what is being heard, what is being seen in those gatherings. They might not be mixed all the time, but they might be haram to attend. They might be the wrong type to attend. So by not attending these gatherings, you are actually doing two things. First of all, you are not encouraging others to attend. If you do attend these type of gatherings, you are really encouraging others that, look, it's okay to attend. You are encouraging the people who are organizing these gatherings that they are okay. But by not attending, you are doing a form of amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar. Because you are giving a clear message that these are not the type of gatherings that the Ibadur Rahman attend. And therefore, certainly I am going to abstain from attending these gatherings. Secondly though, the other benefit is the benefit on the soul. The great benefit that this has on somebody's soul. Because whenever we see something which is wrong, which is haram, anyone who sees something or hears something haram music for example, or watches a haram type of film, or takes part in an activity which is wrong, that thing, those images, those sounds, they don't just disappear. This is a very important lesson taught to us by the ulama of akhlaq. These images and sounds, they don't just disappear. They remain within the person and they play upon his mind. They create certain thoughts. So, you should never think that, well, I'm only going to attend for 5 minutes. I'm only going to attend once or twice. I'm only going to listen to this haram music, for example, for a short period of time and then I won't. Because they can create all sorts of thoughts, which later on perhaps, subconsciously, they play up and they lead to much worse things. So when we come across these things, we need to abstain from them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And what happens is, young people, because their power of discernment, their power of being able to distinguish what will be good for them and what will not be good for them, what will have an effect on them, what won't have an effect on them, because this power of discernment is weaker than in adults, they are unable sometimes to rightfully make the choices with regard to these type of gatherings and these type of activities. So here, it's incumbent on the youth to always take the advice of their adults, their teachers, their parents, and also the parents to guide them in this way. Because it can really leave an impression on their soul, which later on can lead to all sorts of problems. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now, as for the application of this discussion to the events of Karbala, now I'd like to examine all three characteristics today with respect to and with regard to someone who was the complete opposite of Ibadur Rahman, complete embodiment of the Ibadur Shaitan, the servants of Shaitan. The person I am referring to is Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Now we'll see how all three of these characteristics apply to him, that he was so depraved, he was so void of these characteristics that he was really the embodiment of the servants of Shaitan. First of all, as we mentioned last night, this serves as a good contrast between the two groups. The real pure, holy people on the one hand, the Ibadur Rahman, and the real evil people on the other, the Ibadur Shaitan. But also, it enables us to better understand who exactly these evil people were and what sort of personalities they had. And in fact, this ties in very well with some of the excellent questions that the brothers and sisters have been asking in the Q&A session after the majalis upstairs. And so, inshallah, this will tie in with that. And also, I'd like to mention that we should also commend those youth who are taking such an active part in that blood donation campaign, which you'll hear about, inshallah, later on and during these nights. It's a very worthwhile campaign to take part in, and inshallah we can all try and donate some blood, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now when Yazid became the Khalifa following the death of his father Muawiyah, he sends a letter to Walid ibn Utbah in Medina, and he was the governor of Medina, and he says to him, take the bay'ah, take the oath of allegiance from the people of Medina. And in particular, with regard to some of them, he says, be extra tough on them. Be really hard on them. And one of these people was Abu Abdullah Hussein, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Al-Walid, he carries out the instructions of Yazid, and he summons Abu Abdullah. It's the middle of the night, and so Abu Abdullah comes to his house. Over there, Marwan ibn al-Hakam was also present. And what happens is, Walid tells him about the death of his father Muawiyah, and he tells him that give your oath of allegiance to Yazid. Now there's an exchange of words between Abu Abdullah and Marwan. After this, Abu Abdullah mentions these statements which are so powerful. So I'd like to just read these out, and this will give us a very good idea of who Yazid was. How does Abu Abdullah describe him? And then we'll see how these characteristics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in those verses earlier apply to Yazid. He says to him, first of all, he compares the Ahlul Bayt to people like Yazid. It's so powerful. He says, Ayyuhal Amir, O Amir, Inna Ahlul Baytin Nabuwa. We are the family of prophethood. He's introducing themselves and describing the Ahlul Bayt. وَمَعْدِنُ رِسَالَةً, and we are the source of the divine message. وَمُخْتَلَفُ الْمَلَائِكَةِ, and angels visit us. وَبِنَا فَتَحَ اللَّهُ وَبِنَا خَتَمَ اللَّهُ. Allahu Akbar. By us, Allah starts everything, He initiates everything, and by us, He concludes everything. Now, having defined and introduced Ahlul Bayt, he goes on to what Yazid is. Let's see the comparison and the contrast. He says, وَيَزِيد, Yazid on the other hand, رَجُلٌ فَاسِقٌ. He is a sinful man. He is a corrupt man. شَارِبُ الْخَمْرِ. He is the drinker of wine. قَاتِلُ النَّفْسِ الْمُحَرَّمَةِ. He is the killer of innocent people. The killer of innocent. Remember we said, the Ibadur Rahman, they do not take the life of anyone innocent. He goes on to say, مُعْلِنٌ بِالْفِسْقِ. He is infamous for his sinful ways. Then this very powerful statement, وَمِثْلِي لَا يُبَايِعُ مِثْلَهُ. Someone like me does not give their oath of allegiance to someone like him. Allahu Akbar. The Ahlul Bayt, they just cannot even fathom giving their oath of allegiance to someone so evil like Yazid. It is not even a possibility for them to give their oath of allegiance to someone like Yazid. And therefore, we see that the two are poles apart. And it is no wonder, therefore, that someone like Abu Abdullah could never give his oath of allegiance to someone like Yazid. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And we see from history, and I'll give some more examples in a moment, that he was notorious for his drinking, for his gambling, for his debauchery, for his merrymaking, for his playing with animals. You know, he had his own personal monkey that he used to play with. He was famous for all of these things. And now we'll see exactly what the Sunni sources say about this. Not Shia sources, Sunni sources. There was a group who went to see Yazid from Medina, and they were led by Abdullah ibn Khanzala. So when they went to Sham to see Yazid about some matters, they saw exactly how openly, how blatantly he was violating the laws of Islam, the Sharia. And they could not believe this. So when they come back to Medina, they start to describe what they saw in Sham from Yazid. They tell the people about this. Now the two Sunni sources that I'd like to quote. First of all, Ibn Asir in his Al-Kamil fi Tarikh. He says, I'd like to quote exactly what he says, word to word. He says that when they explained what Yazid was like, they said to the people of Medina, we have returned having met someone who doesn't have any religion. He doesn't have any deen. Then they went to describe his characteristics. He drinks wine, he plays the tambourine, singers play music for him, he plays with dogs, and he spends his evenings with thieves. And now, when we apply it to the characteristics of Ibadur Rahman that we saw, remember we said that the Ibadur Rahman, they are those who La yashhaduna zur, they do not give testimony to what is batil, what is zur and false. They do not attend false gatherings. The Ibadur Rahman, they are the ones who do not keep bad company. The Ibadur Rahman are those who do not sin in these ways at all. You see the complete opposite of the Ibadur Rahman. Then we see another report, this time from Ibn al-Jawzi in his book Al-Muntazam. He says, he narrates the same, that when they came back from seeing Yazid, they described to the people of Medina with these words, by Allah, when we left Yazid, we were so frightened that we would be pelted by stones by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a form of punishment because of the sins of this person. They were frightened to be in the court of Yazid. They were so frightened that they thought any moment now Allah is going to pelt us with stones as a punishment because of the sins of that man. Now, what else do they say? They say, he's a man, ma'adallah, you have to excuse me for saying these words. Remember, one of the characteristics of the Ibadur Rahman was that they do not commit zina, they do not commit fornication. He says, he's a man who fornicates with mothers, with daughters and sisters. He drinks wine and he leaves the salah. He has nothing to do with the salah, he misses that. Wa'adallah, this is Yazid. And therefore we see, in fact, that not just him, it wasn't limited to him, but he had an effect on people. And his sinful ways were beginning to spread everywhere. It is narrated, two holy cities, Makkah and Medina, in those two holy cities, haram music started to be played. This is the result of having such a corrupt leader. It wasn't just limited to him, but he was spreading this shaitanic way to other people, to cities all over the place. Now we can get a better understanding why Abu Abdullah could not do bay'ah, why he had to rise against such a corrupt person. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, although his reign was very short, it was only for about 3 odd years, he committed so many sins and he had such a bad influence. It requires many hours to discuss them in detail. I will just like to discuss 3 types of great events that he influenced due to his corrupt nature, due to his sinful ways. Exactly the level of his debauchery and his complete sinful way. The first event, of course, is the event of Karbala. Yazid, it was him who was the illegitimate ruler in the first place. It was him who appointed Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad to become the governor of Kufa. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad was the governor of Basra, but he made him the governor of Kufa to stop Hazrat Muslim ibn Aqil and Abu Abdullah. And it was him who insisted on Abu Abdullah giving him the oath of allegiance. Then we see that even as a result of all of this, in fact, it was because he got the advice to appoint Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad as a governor of Kufa from a Christian called Sarjon. Yazid even used to take advice from Christians of Byzantine. They had complete influence on the court of Yazid. And it was Sarjon, a Christian, who had actually advised Yazid to appoint Ibn Ziyad to be the governor of Kufa in the first place. Second incident is known as the Waqi'a al-Harra. You all must know about this. This is that incident that takes place 2 years after Karbala. And here Yazid sends a huge army. Some reports narrate about 12,000 soldiers to Medina, led by Muslim ibn Uqba. Now Muslim ibn Uqba actually is known as Musrif ibn Uqba. Musrif meaning someone who transcends all bounds and all limitations, not Muslim. So what he does is, he goes to Medina with these troops, and for 3 days, 3 consecutive days, they engage in pillage, in murder, and in raping the people of Medina. And it is narrated by Ibn Abi al-Hadid, the Mu'tazili scholar. He says that, you know, the way that they so easily severed the heads of the people of Medina, he compares it to how a butcher severs the head of sheep. That's how easily they would do it. So for 3 days, they killed, they pillaged, they looted, and they raped the people of Medina. It is narrated 1,700 Muhajir and Ansar were killed. 1,700. On top of that, 10,000 other Muslims were killed. 10,000 Muslims of Medina killed. Because the whole thing that started this was that the Madanis, they were beginning to rebel against Yazid. They were beginning to uprise against him. And thirdly, 1,000 women were raped. So this is the second incident. Thirdly, the third incident in the life of Yazid, which he was responsible for, was the setting the Kaaba, the holy Kaaba, on fire. Ma'azallah. Isn't there anything that this person spared? Not only did he kill innocent people, not only did he kill the grandson of Rasulullah, but now that is not enough. We see that he even set fire to the Kaaba. What happened was, after Yazid's army committed all those atrocities in Medina, they go to Makkah looking for Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Now that Musrif had died, and so Yazid appoints Hussein ibn Numayr to be the leader of the troops. They go to Makkah. When they go to Makkah, Abdullah ibn Zubayr had taken refuge in Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram, we all know, is a place of refuge. No crime can be committed there. People are supposed to be safe there. What do? They use catapults, big catapults, and they take stones covered with fire, and they pelt these big stones covered with fire into Masjid al-Haram. And some of these stones, they hit the Kaaba, and the Kaaba is burnt. This is the third crime that I would like to point to that Yazid committed in his lifetime. Now, let's now, inshallah, before we recite the Masa'ib, let's just all recite the dua together. That, oh Allah, through the intercession of Abu Abdullah and all the shuhada and the usra of Karbala, enable us to be your true servants. Enable us to abstain from committing sins, and enable us to always act in a way that we are never witness to anything false, inshallah. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn. Ya laytana kunna ma'akum fanafuza fawzan 'azima. On the day of Ashura, we see a whole range of heroes representing all the different age groups of society. Karbala presents for us role models of all ages, from the very young, even an infant child, to the very old. And tonight, inshallah, we will honor and we'll remember and we will salute a person who represented the older age group in Karbala, Habib ibn Mudahir. He was of course appointed by Abu Abdullah to be in charge of the right wing of Abu Abdullah's troops. And so he is narrated also in the traditions to be a very loyal companion of Imam Hussein's father and Imam Hussein's brother. In fact, he is described in the narrations as being very learned, very respected, very pious. Now on the night of Ashura, Imam Hussein, he goes to the holy lady Zainab's tent, and at the time the companion Nafi, he just waits outside the tent and he keeps guard. This Nafi, the companion, he hears this conversation happening between Abu Abdullah and the holy lady Zainab. Lady Zainab asks Imam Hussein that, have you verified all of your companions? Have you made sure that they will be loyal to you? Because I am just a little bit worried that when it comes to the time of battle, that they perhaps may desert you. They may just leave you alone. Abu Abdullah says, by Allah, I have done so. And I know of their sincerity and their loyalty to me. And he says, they are more keen to die for me than an infant is keen for the milk of its mother. That's how keen they are to die for me. Now, when Nafi hears this, he goes to Habib ibn Mudahir to tell him what he had heard. Nafi is crying after he heard these words of Abu Abdullah. Look at the response of Habib ibn Mudahir. He says, by Allah, if it wasn't for the fact that I have to wait until Abu Abdullah gives me the command, I would go and attack the enemies this night. So now we see that, of course, in all battles, in all wars, my brothers and sisters, there are always certain groups of people who are exempt from fighting in battles. Never are women supposed to fight. Never are children supposed to fight. And never are old people supposed to fight. But Habib ibn Mudahir, he does not want to be excused from fighting. He wants to fight for Abu Abdullah. He wants to be sacrificed in the way of Imam Hussein. So now, look at the image that we have in our mind from the report. Habib ibn Mudahir, he comes out onto the battlefield with his sword. This image that we have in our mind of this very radiant face, this old man with white hair and with a white beard, he comes out onto the battlefield with his sword. And first of all, he introduces himself so bravely. He says, Ana Habibun wa Abi Mudahir, Farisu Hayja'a wa Harbun Tus'ar. If you don't know me, let me tell you who I am. I am Habib and my father is Mudahir, a horseman of battle when the flames of war have been ignited. He fights bravely and he kills many of the enemy soldiers. But then someone strikes him with a sword, another one hits him with a spear. Habib falls on the ground. As he attempts to stand up, he's struck on his head by a sword, causing him to fall face on the hot sands of Karbala. And now another man climbs on top of him. This other man, he grabs the white hair of Habib ibn Mudahir. He pulls his head and then he severs the head of Habib. The narrator reports the effect this had on Imam Hussein. In Arabic, the narrator says, فَحَدَّ مَقْتَلَهُ الْحُسَيْنِ. It means this killing of Habib crushed Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein many times recited this verse, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Now, my brothers and sisters, there's this very sad report narrated in the traditions. It is reported that they actually took the head of Habib ibn Mudahir and they tied it to a horse and they dragged it through the streets of Kufa. But now, a young boy, he was following this head around. Wherever this head went, this boy went. The rider eventually noticed the boy and he says to him, "What do you want following me like this?" The boy replies, "Nothing, I don't want anything." The rider says to him, "No, you do want something, tell me." He says, "This head that is with you is the head of my father. Will you give it back to me so that I can bury it?" But look at the depravity of these people. The rider turns to him and he says that Ibn Ziyad is not happy for it to be buried, and I want to receive a grand reward for the killing of your father. But, O mourners of Imam Hussein, I say this. Of course, the ruthless enemy soldiers did not just desecrate the head of Habib ibn Abdul, they did the same with the heads of the other martyrs. But this time, instead of tying them to a horse, they fixed the heads of the martyrs on top of spears. And this time, instead of the son of Habib looking on, it was the women and the children of these martyrs who watched helplessly. Allah la'natullah ala al-qawmi al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ.
और मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत।
Just a quick reminder about our program. Every day our program starts at 7:30 sharp.